And we are following breaking news here on KCAL News and streaming on CBS News Los Angeles. LA County District Attorney George Gascón is about to announce his decision on the Menendez brothers murder case. Now, Erik and Lyle Menendez are currently serving life in prison for the murders of their parents in their Beverly Hills home. It took place back in 1989. But the reviewing of new evidence could actually change that. And here with more insight is local criminal defense attorney Rachel Fiset. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's talk a little more about this evidence that is now in question, Rachel.
The DA is reviewing new evidence. There is a letter that is corroborating Erik's story as it relates to his sexual abuse. And the letter was written to his cousin, Andy. And it was close in time to the murders, months before. And it really does state it's happening. I'm fearful. It doesn't say it as explicitly as it could, but it does corroborate the story. And it was not entered into the trial where they were convicted. So this is part of the review that the DA is doing, as well as considering all of the factors as it related to their sentencing at the time.
But Rachel, what about the fact that, we didn't hear about the letter, that, this is coming up now, it maybe came up a little later, but why didn't we hear about this sooner? Why was it not included in the trials?
Judge at the time at the trial where they were convicted did not let much evidence of the sexual abuse come in. And overall, I believe that is part of the review of the resentencing that's happening right now, reviewing whether the trial judge sentenced this correctly, and in part, whether they gave enough weight to what would be a mitigating factor, particularly in sentencing relating to the abuse. Because the trial judge, when they were convicted, not the first time they were on trial when the jury was hung, did not really let the defense explore the sexual abuse as a mitigating factor. It's not a defense, but it would have been a mitigation.
But more of that information was included in that first trial, which ended up with the jury not being able to come to a decision. But in the second trial, a lot of that evidence was kept out, and that is when they were actually convicted and sentenced to life. So what could actually happen today with Gascón?
So what I think is likely to happen is that he will announce that he will go to court and recommend for a resentencing hearing. And at that resentencing hearing, he will likely recommend that the brothers be released for time served. So this is a press conference. It is likely to bring us information that relates to whether he's recommending resentencing and that he is recommending resentencing, because there has been strong public support for resentencing the brothers and really a more fulsome view of all of the evidence, even that which was not included in the trial.
But just because the DA suggests this does not mean that the judge is going to take that action, correct? I mean, the judge can still say they have to serve a life sentence?
So the judge does not have to agree with the DA. Often prisoners request resentencing or to commute their sentence in some way to make it shorter, and most of those are rejected. But when the DA and the prosecuting body agrees with the defendant and those that are in prison, it is more likely, when everybody's on the same page, that the judge will also agree. But it certainly doesn't mean that the judge has to agree.
And I know last week when we were talking about this, our Mike Rogers on our breaking news desk, he did some research and found out that about half of the cases are actually changed when this does happen. So it's really a 50-50 chance. But, a lot of people have speculated that this is part of a politically motivated for the district attorney because he is running. But the family members say this is nothing to do with politics. This is because these men have been ideal inmates and have really, changed their lives. They also say that besides being model inmates, that people now look at sexual abuse differently than they did back then when it came to a young boy being abused versus a young girl.
I think that is all part of it. Everything you've identified will go into the decision as to whether resentencing is appropriate by the judge, and it likely went into the decision of George Gascón on whether he will recommend a resentencing. And the timing is a little suspicious. This request has been on his desk for a year, meaning this is happening right before the election, and it has a lot of popular support and a lot of attention. But at the same time, he may be showing that he is carefully reviewing resentencing requests and requests where there is sexual abuse that may not have garnered the same type of sympathy, the same type of belief where at the time of the sentence, as was the case here.
And, you know, we also have to look at the fact that they have spent more than 30 years in prison for the crimes. And so often when someone commits a murder, they are released after 30 years, correct? I mean, what they're asking for isn't really anything, I guess, drastic as far as how long they have actually been in prison, correct? I mean,
they've been in prison a long time. Their sentencing choice was life in prison without parole or the death penalty based on the crime they were charged with, because it was found to be premeditated. So they were first degree with a special circumstance, which elevated them to this life sentence. So without this type of resentencing or hearing, they really aren't eligible to get out, unlike other prisoners or other defendants that may have been convicted of murder, but without the special circumstance and without the premeditation. So that's really the difference here. The views on sentencing have changed since they've been sentenced. So really, this is in some ways a sign of the times as it relates to sexual abuse and mental health, and how that could have mitigated what the sentence would have been should they have been found guilty for these murders today.
Yes, and for folks that don't know, back then, the brothers were accused of, after killing their parents, they were going out, they were shopping, they were buying expensive cars and jewelry. And so a lot of people thought, hey, they did this out of greed. And people didn't even hear about the abuse that they now say they were enduring in that home.
That's right. So this is really a shift, and I would say, honestly, a commentary on how the DA may view the prosecution at that time and how that trial went down. So this is not an appeal. This is not a change of the felony that they were charged with, but it does appear to be a general review of the evidence that was let in at that trial and how the jury treated it.
Exactly. And a big piece of this evidence is the letter that was written and sent to a cousin that was written, I believe it was 8 weeks, maybe 8 months before the murders happened. But we also then heard from another young man who says that he was also sexually abused by Mr. Menendez. He was in the band Menudo, and says that he was also abused. So this is something else that has come out that we didn't hear about during the trial.
That's right. And whether that would have been let into a trial nowadays, we don't know. There are reasons that could have been kept out. But as far as a factor considered in sentencing that really does corroborate the brothers' story that they were abused, the fact that their father abused a member of Menudo with whom he worked as his job, it really does corroborate their story that he was a predator, that he did sexually abuse them. So this is another factor that is weighing into the decision of whether or not to resentence them. And in resentencing, what we really mean is ask for their release.
And Rachel, how long do you think it would take for a judge to make their decision? Do they usually spend a lot of time weighing in all of this evidence before they decide what they're going to do?
Time, but really this would just be a motion to the court. The brothers would also write a motion to the court. They would both be on the same page, and it might not take particularly long for the judge to review this, as once the DA has made up his mind that this will happen, they will pretty immediately take it to court. So I think we could see the release of the brothers by the end of the year, if not sooner, if that is the DA's decision. Now, what I think we also may want to think about is what else the judge may decide should the judge grant the request to resentence or release them. He may put stipulations or other conditions on their release. So they may be required to go to classes or therapy or something else that keeps them not offending again if the judge finds that to be worthy. So there's a few ways that the resentencing, should that request be made, there's a few ways that can end up, and other conditions could be placed on them in their release.
And you know, this case has just had so much attention lately. There's been documentaries and movies made about the case, and for a while it almost seemed like a forgotten case because it did happen so long ago, but it seems like it's just been resurrected in so many different ways. And you also wonder if any of that might play a factor in this.
Absolutely. Public attention, I believe, has played a factor, and this just happens to be the year that all of this came out, and it really has let the public, a new generation of the public, have an awareness of this case in a telling where the sexual abuse is really highlighted. And it's hard to understand the sexual abuse, but once it's highlighted in these ways that are really palatable to the public, through shows, through the documentary, I think it becomes less of an issue of public safety should the Menendez brothers be let out of prison, as it looks like the crime was committed for a reason specifically against the parents who had been abusing them since they were very young children.
But do you think the judge will also take into account that they have been called model inmates, that they have been actually helping people, you know, that are serving counseling, talking to people, getting degrees while they were in custody? So do you think that the judge will look at their behavior and use that also?
Absolutely. That's another factor. I think the DA is also considering that factor. Had they gone to prison and shown themselves to be violent and dangers to society, it is very unlikely that we would be in this position, even given the media attention that has surrounded their case. So the fact that they appear that they would be model citizens, perhaps on the outside of prison, because they've been model citizens on the inside, really is going to influence the DA's decision, the judge's decision, any specific conditions of release, and how they would be expected to live should they be released from prison.
And I also think that, you know, perhaps hearing from so many of the family members, including Kitty's family members, you know, talking about the hope that the boys, or the men, they often call them the boys in their news conference last week, because they have been in custody since they were teenagers, and now they're 53 and 56. They are men, but they were all speaking out in support of them, saying that they wanted them to be home for Thanksgiving, to enjoy the holidays with the family. And I think we heard from just one family member who was against this, but there was a large group of family members that were at that news conference last week, really encouraging the DA to bring this forward to the judge and hoping that they would be released.
Correct. And in many ways, the district attorney represents families, represents victims. And when victims have been murdered, the victim's family becomes in many ways like the client. And so in this case, where the victim's family, which of course is also the brother's family, but where the victim's family really supports the release of the perpetrators, and here again, it was a brutal homicide. No one is contesting that. But where the victim's family is supportive of the resentencing, the DA gives a lot of weight to that because in so many ways, the DA is representative of victims in the community.
Yes, and as you said, I mean, it was a brutal crime scene. They used shotguns and they shot their parents multiple times in that home. And some of that testimony that they were talking about during the trial, I mean, they shot their mother multiple times as well, and saying that she didn't stop their father. But the men have also received a lot of celebrity support, including Kim Kardashian, Rosie O'Donnell. They've been getting on this train, so to speak, also pushing for their release.
The public support, the family support, all of these things weigh in favor of a resentencing. When celebrities come out, it is really to just garner public awareness and use their influence to get what they believe is the right result. So here, the Kardashian support, the celebrity support really has just continued to spiral the public support as it relates to this case, and really try to influence the district attorney's decision to support the resentencing and go to the court. As we know, the district attorney is an elected official. So while the victims are really who they are listening to most in a lot of crimes, the public's support of how they carry out public safety in their job is incredibly important to a district attorney.
Yes, and we are still waiting. We were told that the district attorney would be speaking at 1:30. He is now about 16 minutes late or so, but we do know that he has a very big decision. He is weighing in a lot of factors. We can see the room here where a really large contingency of media is there. I believe there may also be some family members that are also there waiting for what he is proposing and what he will be saying to the judge, or what he has decided in this decision. And we had heard that he had been reviewing this case for quite some time. And I don't know if it came as a surprise to you that the decision that the district attorney has made came as quickly as it did, Rachel, or did it not seem to come fast to you?
I think once it became public that he was reviewing the decision, he was ready or close to ready to make a decision, and probably wanted to gauge the public support for a resentencing. Again, the job is often construed as really it's protecting the public, it's listening to the victims, but he wanted to see if the public would support a resentencing of people that we know committed a brutal murder. But considering all of the factors, if that would be supported. And I think in the short period of time that we knew he was reviewing this decision until today, we did see a lot of public support for the resentencing, and he likely didn't need more information.
Yes, and I am hearing that there are family members in the room there waiting to hear this announcement as well. But you can just see here really a large gathering of the media that have been covering this case. And really, it has been in the spotlight for quite some time. You never know which came first, the documentaries or just interest, but certainly there has been a movie and documentaries about the case. And a lot of people, I've heard, Rachel, from a lot of people who weren't even alive when this happened back in 1989, but they have very strong opinions about the case based on these documentaries and the movies.
It really is a new generation that is now seeing the same really horrific crime come to light, but the way it's being portrayed, there's more media, there's more ability to get media attention, and the way that it's being portrayed and how the public is viewing it. Yes, it's a whole new generation that did not remember the crime when it happened and remember the media attention that it garnered then. So now there's fresh eyes looking at all of the circumstances under which they were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. And when you look at it with fresh eyes, with a fresh view from the media and a different perspective, really the focus on the sexual abuse, the life sentence seems like it was too much. It seems like they were mistreated by their family and then mistreated by the system. And so I think that's what we're seeing now through a new generation learning about this heinous crime and the heinous acts that led to it.
And that is exactly what some of the family members were saying when they held their news conference a week ago, that they were abused by their family and by the system, that what they were sentenced with really went beyond what they deserved based on the abuse that they were allegedly enduring. And, as you were mentioning, and we've talked about in the past, 35 years ago, 30, plus years ago, we weren't hearing a lot about teenage boys being abused, and they weren't discussing it. It wasn't coming up. We weren't hearing cases about it. And now it's very different. We have heard about those cases, and we've heard now again about the young man who was in Menudo, who also came out and said that he was also abused by their father. But, now we're seeing it all, like you said, with a fresh set of eyes, and we're hearing so much more than what was actually put out there back then.
That's right. I think there's a lot of issues at play with what was put out back there, what viewpoints were relating to sexual abuse. The brother's attorney has continued to say that if they were sisters, this would not have been the case. They would not be imprisoned for life for this crime. Frankly, I don't know if I agree with that sentiment, but I do agree that at this point, sexual abuse is treated a lot differently than it was treated in the 80s, in the 90s, when they were convicted and sentenced. And I think it's more like we know more about the mental health effects relating to sexual abuse. We believe accusers and victims more at this time. We give more credit to what they say, and we find the allegations more credible as a society, whether it be a man or a woman. And so I think all of that is really part of the fresh eyes and part of the society that we're in now, and really seeing the unfairness of them being in prison for life if indeed they were sexually abused in these heinous ways that the evidence is now corroborating, and some of it being new evidence is corroborating that this life sentence just doesn't make sense.
And I'm going to put you on the spot here, Rachel. You said that that wasn't necessarily your sentiment. What, do you want to expand on that?
Well, I think that the way that the judge treated the sexual abuse in the trial, not really allowing it in, I don't know that women have been believed for years either. Yes, it was more likely not to believe that a powerful man like Mr. Menendez was abusing his sons in the way that he was, or the way that they said he was. I mean, just there are atrocities that the sons talked about relating to child rape. But I also don't necessarily know, I don't think we'll ever know, that had there been daughters, that the jury or the judge would have believed the daughters either. So we may still be in the same situation if the accusers and the defendants were women at this point.
Although we do have to mention that in the first trial, the jury could not come to a decision because they were hearing about more of that abuse. So, you know, they did hear it, and they were concerned about it, and they did not come to the same decision that was made in the second trial, in which the jury did not hear about all of the abuse. It was kept out, and then that is when they were convicted and sentenced to life.
That's right. And it's so interesting, just as a commentary on the legal system, how much the judge and the judge's biases really can play into a courtroom. Each of those rulings being a decision of the judge on whether to let evidence in, whether to let remarks by the prosecutor in, whether to abstain, to sustain an objection or to overrule an objection by defense counsel. It's really so important inside of the legal system what judge is presiding over a matter, because they have so much influence on what the jury hears, and what the jury hears and what the perspective that the jury hears matters so much to a conviction or an acquittal.
Yes, and as we've mentioned, this is happening just days before the election, and Gascón's opponent is speaking out about this new development in the case. Senior reporter Ross Palumbo is here with that for us. Ross.
Well, you know, this is coming just 12 days before a highly contentious election. Even though Gascón is 30 points down in the latest polling, he is getting in front of cameras more and more frequently. You know, he's been very elusive. He even told me during an interview recently that he wished he had spoken to the public more during his 4-year tenure. Now we're seeing him jump into the fray on this in press conference after press conference, his decision coming before the election, and his opponent, Nathan Hochman, obviously has been concerned about this. His team has been wondering why now. They're waiting with us as they watch our coverage to hear what Gascón has to say. But I can tell you the feeling on background from the Hochman camp is that this is opportunistic. You know, it's good to reflect that Nathan Hochman has raised $2.5 million, the limit for this campaign, compared to Gascón, which I believe is under $500 million. So he's been outspent. Nathan Hochman has ads just about everywhere. And now we see Gascón all of a sudden coming to the podium. So it's really up to the viewer to decide precisely what is happening here. But it is interesting that he's had this information for years and years, and suddenly now he's taking up this case.
And while people have actually said that this is politically motivated, the family was saying this has nothing to do with politics. This is just the timing of it, that he has had a chance to review the information, and it also comes after the documentaries and the movies that have been out of late. And so a lot of folks are saying that is what has spurred all of this. But of course, Hochman is saying the timing is the timing. Well,
they are curious about it. And one more interesting point here, one of the primary concerns that the public has had, and Nathan Hochman has voiced, is the enhancements on crimes that Gascón has since the beginning of his administration really flat out refused to go after. And here in the Menendez case, the decision could very well be in a few minutes that he believes the enhancements in this case, remember, there were 2 murder charges with extenuating circumstances. It was such a violent crime that he could suggest that the enhancements go away, and that would bring their sentence possibly to 50 years behind bars, not 50 to life. And that would mean that they would be eligible for parole and could be released if a judge then grants the new sentencing. Remember, what's about to happen here is the district attorney is about to make a recommendation. It is still up to a judge to decide what happens from there. But it could be the key point in this election, the enhancements on crimes that greatly increase the sentencing, that could be changing right before our eyes in real time.
Well, and of course, they said that this was premeditated and the parents were shot with those shotguns multiple times, including at point blank range. Kitty was shot in the face, and Jose was shot multiple times, also in the head at point blank range. So this was certainly a violent crime. And, you know, that they did this, that they planned it out, so they say. And then a lot of people say that they were very callous when they, you know, right after this happened, they were seen out shopping, buying, I think it was a Rolex watch, buying, you know, expensive cars. And a lot of people said that this was all about greed, where a lot of others say they were abused and mentally and emotionally. Perhaps they just weren't acting appropriate, but part of this might have been that they were celebrating that their abuse was over.
Well, you know, we remember from when this trial first happened, both times, just how violent the crime was. And the fact that the mother, Kitty, was shot as well was such a shocker to so many people. And so, Rachel Fiset, I know you're still with us. I wanted to ask you about the enhancements on this crime. If that is precisely what DA George Gascón says he wants to take away, that would be a pretty dramatic change in the sentencing protocol, wouldn't it be?
That would be a dramatic change. And I think, though, again, that would be hearkening back to the mitigating factors of the sexual abuse, because there was, again, they murdered their parents. No one disputed that. It then became a game of, was it premeditated? What did they do? It was violent. There were various enhancements that made their sentence longer. So if he were to take away the enhancements now, I think that they may still remain in prison for a while. Given it would lessen their sentence to about 50 years. They've served about 35 years. So that they may still remain. I think that it's more likely that he would simply recommend a release, not all of this public support for releasing them and then have to explain to the public how enhancements work.
And I am reading a quote here from Gascón that he says that his office had a moral and an ethical obligation to review what is being presented to us and to determine if such evidence could have swayed jurors away from first-degree convictions at the time. So, you know, we've been talking, Ross, before you joined us, that, you know, during the first trial, the abuse allegations were included, but in the second trial, they were not.
They were not. And now we have the new testimony coming from the young man that was part of the boy band, Menudo, right? The problem, and I'm sure Rachel knows all about this with the letter, was that there was no date on it. So that was questionable. And the prosecution was able to make a lot of hay over that. But we did not have the testimony now. So I think we're all interested to know, Rachel, how much is the testimony going to really add to this? I mean, that is really compelling evidence now, new evidence possibly coming in.
That is compelling new evidence, and the judge does not really need to argue about whether it would have been admissible at trial if it had all the indicia of reliability at trial and what the jury would have made of it then, because it becomes new evidence as it relates to sentencing. So it doesn't become evidence that people are fighting about in trial as to whether it's admissible, whether it's credible, what its lack of date means. And the same goes for the evidence as it relates to the young man in Menudo, stating that he was also abused and assaulted, because that would absolutely be an argument at trial as to whether that would be admissible. But in a resentencing hearing, they are weighing factors of the sentence, and this evidence relates to the factors of the sentence and the corroboration of their abuse. But the abuse becomes the main factor in determining that they should be resentenced and not face this life sentence.
And for, keep going.
No,
Sorry.
keep going, please.
Oh, yes. So in truth, they were not acting in self-defense, but it would take away in some possible zone, it would have taken away the premeditation and the first degree element of this homicide. They were not acting in self-defense. They could have walked away. There are all of those the true meaning of what self-defense means. They don't fit in that mold. But the sexual abuse for years and their mental state through time and how they viewed their parents as incredibly dangerous as a result of the abuse, whether it was reasonable to believe that they were to be harmed by their parents at the moment when they killed them, becomes mitigating factors. They were always going to be convicted of some kind of homicide. It's just whether it rose to the level of premeditation, first degree murder enhancements that led to this exact sentence.
And for our viewers that are just joining us in the 2 o'clock hour, we are waiting for LA County DA George Gascón to give us an update on the Menendez brothers case. He is going to let us know what he will be referring to a judge about whether or not these men should be resentenced for the murders of their parents back in 1989. They admit to killing their parents, but they say it was in self-defense because they have been abused for years and not for greed, as been claimed. And you said you had a question for Rachel.
Well, and they've served such a substantial part of their sentence that's not to be forgotten. Rachel, I wanted to ask you, as we keep talking about the political motivation here, you're an attorney, you move in all these legal circles. Is it within the realm of possibility? What are your personal thoughts about this? Is it possible that Gascón really waited until right before the election and is trying to reach out to the public because he doesn't have the reach that his opponent, well-funded Nathan Hochman, has to get publicity and appear to be, acting in his official capacity just before people and while people are voting?
It was a perfect storm of events that led to this timing. A lot of it had to do with the series Monsters and the documentary that came out. I think the series got more popular probably than people may have anticipated, and the timing just happened to work out that the TV programs began to drive a public support for the brothers at the same time that Gascón did have an opportunity based on the request for resentencing that has been on his desk for quite some time.
Well, let's interrupt you,
what we're
Rachel.
gonna see.
Forgive us because DA George Gascón is coming into the room. So please watch us with us, Amy, as this much-awaited press conference is about to get underway more than a half hour later than expected.
Yes, and he was just speaking to Kitty Menendez's family members and is approaching the podium. Let's listen in.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And before I begin speaking, I want to also introduce some other people that are here with me, and I hope I'm pronouncing the names right because I've seen handwritten part of it. But I have Ana Maria Barat, Jose Menendez, Jose Menendez, and niece Karen Vandermolen, and Kitty's niece. They're all here with us. Also with us here is Brock Lunsford. He's the Assistant Head Deputy for the Post-Litigation Conviction Unit, and Nancy Cervier, who is the Deputy District Attorney in charge of the Resentencing Unit. Let me begin by telling you that this is a case where we've had many people in this office spend a great deal of time reviewing the case. I have to tell you unequivocally that we don't have a universal agreement. There are people in the office that strongly believe that the Menendez brothers should stay in prison the rest of their life, and they do not believe that they were molested. And there are people in the office that strongly believe that they should be released immediately and that they were in fact molested. I have to tell you that after a very careful review of all the arguments that were made for people on both sides of this equation, I came to a place where I believe that under the law, resentencing is appropriate, and I am going to recommend that to a court tomorrow. What that means in this particular case is that we're going to recommend to the court that the life without the possibility of parole be removed and that they would be sentenced for murder, which, because there are 2 murders involved, that would be 50 years to life. However, because of their age, under the law, since they were under 26 years of age at the time that these crimes occurred, they will be eligible for parole immediately. The teams that have worked on this, on the resentencing side of it, have spent literally probably hundreds of hours by now looking at this case. These cases were originally presented on the habeas side of it, which I'll explain in a moment what that is, last year, and then the request for a prosecutor-initiated resentencing occurred earlier this year. And there have been people in this office working in these cases from the very beginning, as well as many other cases that we have. The reason why I'm here today and why I came in front of all of you about 10 days ago is because there was a more recent documentary about the case that again brought a tremendous amount of public attention. And we know there have been other documentaries, so this is not the first, this is a more recent one. And frankly, our office got flooded with requests for information. And even though this case was already scheduled to be heard in late November, I decided to move this forward because, quite frankly, we did not have enough resources to handle all the requests. And one of the things that I thrive to do in this office is to be very transparent in everything that we do. In this case, we review the prison files. And you have to understand that the way the process works, when you're talking about a resentencing under the law, it really focuses not necessarily on what the original crimes were, but it focuses on, has the person been rehabilitated, number one, and number two, can they be released safely into the community? Under that rubric, since I've been in office, we have resentenced over 300 people, including 28 for murder. Only 4 have reoffended. If that was a regular recidivism rate in this country, we would be the safest nation in the world, but we know that it's not. In fact, somewhere between 40 and 50% of the people that go to prison reoffend and get rearrested. And that's why we have so many problems. However, when you look at the case of the Menendez brothers, you see 2 very young people. One was 19 and the other was 21 when they committed these horrible acts. And I want to underline, they were horrible acts. There is no excuse for murder. And I will never imply that what we're doing here is to excuse that behavior. Because even if you get abused, the right path is to call the police, seek help. But I understand also how sometimes people get desperate. We often see women, for instance, that have been battered for years, and sometimes they will murder their abuser out of desperation. And I do believe that the brothers were subjected to a tremendous amount of dysfunction in the home, and molestation. But they went to prison for life without the possibility of parole, which meant that certainly under the law at that time, they had no hopes of ever getting out. They could have done what many other people do, which is basically said, you know what, I'm here for the rest of my life, so I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to misbehave, I'm going to join gangs, I'm going to live the life of the person. But they never did that. To the contrary, even though they didn't think that they would ever be left free, they engaged in a different journey. A journey of redemption and a journey of rehabilitation. And often the people that begin their journey of rehabilitation and redemption in prison is often very internal in what they do, and one of our lawyers pointed out this today, is usually the path is people try to further their education, do things for self-improvement, which the brothers have done, by the way. But it's more unique or less usual, I guess, when people not only do that, but they also begin to engage in ways to make life for others better. And in this case, the brothers have been doing so for a very long time, creating groups to deal with how to address untreated trauma, creating groups to deal with other inmates that have physical disabilities and may be treated differently. Even in one case, Lyle negotiating for other inmates as to the conditions that they live under during prison. And all this was done by two young people, now they're not as young, that had no hopes of ever getting out of prison. They have been in prison for nearly 35 years. I believe that they have paid their debt to society, and the system provides a vehicle for their case to be reviewed by a parole board, and if the parole concurs with my assessment, and it will be their decision, they will be released accordingly. I must underline, however, this case will be filed in court tomorrow. The final decision will be made by the judge. Court has to agree with my conclusion that they deserve to be resentenced. It is very possible that there may be members of this office that will be present in court opposing the resentencing. And they have a right to do so. And we encourage those that disagree with us to speak, and the court is the appropriate place to do it. We certainly feel we're very sure not only that the brothers have rehabilitated and that they will be safe to be reintegrated in our society, but that they have paid their dues, not only for the crimes that they committed, but because of all the other things they have done to improve the life of so many others. So, again, we will be filing for resentencing tomorrow. We're seeking that they would be sentenced to life with the possibility of parole, as opposed to life without the possibility of parole, which is they currently have. That means that they would have 50 years to life because there were two murders, but because of the age upon which they were convicted, under 26, under current law, that means they're eligible for youthful parole. I think there is also important to have some introspection today, because I think that often, for cultural reasons, we don't believe victims of sexual assault. whether they're women, whether they're men. We saw in our first trial, which, by the way, they were tried twice. The first trial hung, meaning the jury could not come to a conclusion, and in fact, about half of the jury wanted to convict them of manslaughter, which, if that were have been the case, they would have been off prison a long time ago. And then there was a second trial, and then they were convicted of murder with special circumstances, which led to the life without the possibility of parole. But it's salient to understand that our own implicit and sometimes explicit bias around sexual abuse and sexual assaults often leads us to severe injustices in our community. And I want to speak to those that are victims of sexual assault now, whether you're a man or a woman. Know that we're here for you. If you're a victim of sexual assault in this community, and by that we're talking about LA County, not just LA City, you can come for help. Whether you're prepared to prosecute or not, we will be here for you. We have services for you. And if you're prepared to move forward with the prosecution, we will evaluate it as we do any other case. And if we believe that the evidence is there to present a credible case in front of a jury that can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, we will proceed accordingly. You do not have to suffer alone. You don't have to keep it to yourself. And help is here unconditionally. I'm going to say a few words in Spanish because I know there's tremendous amount of interest from the Spanish media, and I know that there are going to be other speakers.
LA County DA George Gascón announcing that he is supporting resentencing for Lyle and Erik Menendez, and he will be filing this in court tomorrow. He says that this has been a decision in which his office has been split. Some were in favor of the resentencing, others believing that the men should stay in prison, and now they will be resentenced. What he would like is that they would be 50 years with the opportunity of parole, and because they committed the crimes under the age of 26, they could actually be set free for the time that they have already served.
Yeah, the real change here is that he wants the possibility of parole introduced. That means they could walk out as soon as a judge decides to change this, if they do in fact. But so interesting, the LA District Attorney, of course, originally prosecuted the case back in 1996. Now he's saying, Gascón just telling us that there are people in that office that still do not believe the Menendez brothers were molested, that believe that they should still be in prison for life. He anticipates that some of them will show up to this hearing tomorrow to protest against their boss, the current DA. This on top of the more than a dozen lawsuits from his own staff he's facing before election. What an incredible outcome right here.
Yes, and Rachel Fiset still with us. Rachel, what do you make of all of this?
I am not surprised by his decision to support resentencing. It sounds like he is trying to get the ball rolling immediately. He's going to file his request in court tomorrow. So he's really trying to move this along. And it sounds like his request is, generally speaking, to have them released immediately. So this is not particularly surprising. It's also not surprising that people inside of the DA are disagreeing. Prosecutors have very strong feelings on prosecutions and breaking the law. So it will be incredibly interesting to see if anybody actually does show up and protest inside of the courtroom what the DA is actually asking for.
Well, one person protesting right now and just issuing a statement through me a few moments ago, or to me, that is his opponent, Nathan Hochman. He points out in a recent quote from him that he received this information in May of 23 and that he was supposed to consider the case in February 24, but took no action until now. So Hochman now says, quote, by releasing this now, Gascón has cast a cloud over the fairness and impartiality of his decision, allowing Angelenos to question whether the decision was correct or just another desperate political move by a DA running a losing campaign and scrambling to grab headlines.
Well, I do think it was interesting, though, that Gascón did mention that his office was divided on whether or not they should be resentenced. And one thing that he did mention also is that while this was heinous crimes, that they have been living a life of redemption and rehabilitation, knowing that they were not getting out of prison, that they were serving a life sentence, yet they were still doing what he called creating groups to help with other inmates with trauma and disabilities, that Lyle had been negotiating conditions for other inmates, that they were doing what he thought was good while serving, even though they were not going to get out. It wasn't like they were doing it hoping to get out. He claims they were doing it because of who they are.
But Rachel, you have to admit how interesting it is that Gascón himself in this press conference just admits again that this was all scheduled to come up in late November, but he chose to do this earlier today.
That's right. And I think if there is a change in DA, I believe Gascón is trying to get this through while he is still in charge. I don't think he is sure what Nathan Hoffman would do if he won, and would that change the DA's position on a resentencing? Would the hearing be scheduled after Gascón is no longer in charge? And what would somebody do inside of the courtroom arguing on behalf of the prosecution if that's the case?
I'm going to cut you off real quick here so we can hear from some of the family members that are speaking.
Kitty's
These
sister,
are
as well as Diane Vandermolen
Kitty and
Hernandez,
Jose's family members. I believe this is
thank you for joining me, everyone.
the niece of Jose Menendez.
Today is a
speaking right
day
now.
filled with hope for our family. We are here because District Attorney Gascón has taken a brave and necessary step forward by recommending a resentencing for Lyle and Erik. The DA's decision reflects the truth that is hidden for so long, and I am grateful for his leadership in making this choice. We stand united in our hope and gratitude. Together, we can make sure that Erik and Lyle receive the justice they deserve and finally come home. Thank you to District Attorney George Gascón for his courage and leadership. This step gives us all hope that the truth will finally be heard and that Lyle and Erik can begin to heal from the trauma of their past. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah.
I believe Jose Menendez is going to say a few words.
This is the niece of Kitty Menendez,
I'm sorry.
Joan Vandermolen.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming. We are here today because District Attorney Gascón has taken a brave and compassionate step forward by recommending resentencing for my cousins, Erik and Lyle. And we wish to offer our deepest gratitude to DA Gascón. This decision is not just a legal matter. It is a recognition of the abuse my cousins endured, and we are grateful for the DA's leadership in putting justice over politics. We know this wasn't an easy decision, but is the right one. This is about truth, justice, and healing. It is time for Lyle and Erik to come home. And I ask all of you to join us in this fight for justice. We stand united in our hope and in our gratitude. Together we can make sure that Erik and Lyle receive the justice they deserve and finally come home. Thank you again to District Attorney George Gascón for his courage and leadership. This step gives us all hope that truth will finally be heard and Erik and Lyle can begin to heal from the horrors of their past. We hope this will also shed light and increase awareness and help others who have been victimized by sexual violence. Thank you all so much for being here today. We are grateful for everyone's support.
Is there anyone else speaking?
No, that's it.
Okay. Okay, and I apologize. I'm reading notes here and I'm trying to understand all the notes. Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain, so you go tomorrow, you file a case for resentencing, Then what happens after? Are the brothers going to be there tomorrow? And when is the role of the parole board going to come in?
Right, and you know what? I'm going to actually have the people that are handling the case walk you through all of it. The brothers will not be there tomorrow. The role of parole board comes later. But Nancy, why don't you walk everybody through?
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll file our...
Say your name, ma'am, your name and your title.
My name is Nancy Thaberge. I'm the deputy in charge of the resentencing unit. This is Brock Lunsford, assistant head deputy of the post-conviction litigation division. So what will happen is tomorrow we will file the actual petition requesting resentencing with the legal arguments and accompanying exhibits as to why we think it's appropriate. It's just a filing. No one's going to physically be in the courtroom. From there, we'll also serve the defense with our motion and our paperwork so that they'll have their copies. And from there, we will coordinate with the defense to set up a court date with the court so that the petition can be heard. Now, whether or not that's a setting or a hearing will be decided between us and the defense and the court once everybody gets an idea of what we've filed. Then from there, at the hearing, the defense can either decide to have the defendants, the Menendez brothers, physically brought into court. They can ask that the individuals appear by video or audio WebEx, a kind of a Zoom participation, which we all kind of adapted to because of COVID. And then from there, we will do the hearing and submit all the written and legal and oral arguments and any evidence that needs to be admitted at the time, and then the court will rule at that point. But we don't have that court date yet because we're just starting the process tomorrow. But it's our intention to have that go forward before the habeas, because if the judge grants it, that may impact the defense's decision to proceed on the habeas. So we're gonna try it just as a matter of economy of time to stack it one before the other.
Now, have the brothers found out about this in real time, or were they told about this beforehand, or what was their reaction if they were?
No, this was...
No, this is actually the family was only invited to come. They were not aware what the final decision was until a few months ago. The brothers may be actually seeing you guys on TV or social media, but no one knew other than a very small number of people in this office. And by the way, I should tell you that actually the final decision was just made about an hour ago. Right, then it goes back to the prison system, and then the parole system takes over that. That's correct.
Would there be a parole or probationary period? Would they have to live in a halfway house, or simply be released if they're allowed to be released?
You know, those are really completely entirely up to the parole board. Please, we'll try.
What was the factor that made the final decision? You said the final decision was just made. Was it the letter? Was it the Menudo confession? What was it that put you over the top to make?
No, what it was is I was evaluating the arguments that were being made within my office, both pro and against the release.
DA, can I ask you?
Hold on, I had it.
Calls from
Yeah.
people that
I'm, you have made resentencing a cornerstone of your tenure as district attorney here in Los Angeles. There are some people who have accused you of using this very, very highly publicized, clearly case to use it for politics, given how close we are to the election. What's your response to people who have been making that claim?
There's nothing political about this. We have resentenced over 300 people, including 28 for murder, and we will continue to resentence people in the future. And that's all I can tell you.
But DA, question.
Yes, sir. Excuse me, please. You're interrupting.
Everyone's interrupted. I'm just wondering how your bid for re-election.
Yes, please. Yes.
Could the brothers be home by Thanksgiving?
I don't know the answer to that.
Why did you decide not to go with the reduced voluntary manslaughter?
That was part of the process that I was still going through up until a couple hours ago. I don't believe that a manslaughter would have been the appropriate charge given the premeditation that was involved in the murders. I believe that these were clearly murders that were premeditated. Now, the motivation, that's where, differences of opinion come up, but I don't think it would be appropriate to go all the way down to manslaughter.
DA,
yes, ma'am.
has your bid for re-election impacted
Would you
your
please
decision?
stop? I am not going to talk about re-election, okay?
Okay. So
If you want to talk to re-election, go outside, we'll talk later. Please.
Relax.
It's a fair question.
No, it's not.
It is a.
I'm sorry, you're interrupting, sir.
Be respectful.
Please.
¿Qué va a pasar mañana después de que presenten en la corte sus documentos?
Pues depende, como estaba explicando la abogada, la encargada de esta unidad.
We are listening to DA George Gascón explaining his decision to suggest resentencing for Kyle and Erik Menendez, saying that this has happened. He is resentenced, or at least suggested resentencing for more than 300 people. 28 of them have been for murder, and only 4 have gone on to recommit crimes. So he is saying that this is not a political
because we're going to make a decision one way or the other.
He was reprimanding someone who was asking questions about the election.
Well, it's inappropriate, of course, for the DA on official business to talk about the election. So interesting, Amy, to hear that the DA just made this decision an hour ago.
I don't think so.
Let's
Once it's filed, it's filed. It's up to the court to take it from there.
You mentioned.
Yes, I'm sorry.
In a parole situation, obviously you've got a policy not sending DAs to those, since you're obviously supporting the push for release here. How would that work with people from post-vacation? We sending some big donors for their release?
No. We have a policy that we only send victim services advocate if the victim or the victim's family wants that support. We don't send lawyers to our parole boards to relitigate a case. The parole board is fully aware of what the initial crime was, the crime that led to the conviction. Their work is primarily to evaluate whether they're rehabilitated and safe to be released, and that will be the way here.
Can you break down the timeline for us? Can we expect a hearing by the end of the year? Do you know when we might see
Nancy,
something on the
we
books?
don't.
I'm hoping to get it on calendar, depending on the defense preparedness. I'd like to see it go to hearing probably within the next 30 to 45 days at the most. Because, there's not much to argue because we're kind of a collective.
Okay, there's one more question, please, but related to the case, not to elections. If you want to talk about elections, we'll do that.
Related to the case.
Yes, sir.
What would you like to say right now to Erik and Lyle Menendez?
What we like to say to them, and it's we, because it's not I made the final decision, obviously, but we have a whole team that worked on it. We have a family here that wants to be reunited, is that we appreciate what they did while they were in prison. While I disapprove of the way they handle their abuse, we hope that they not only have learned, which appears that they have, but that if they get reintegrated into our community, that they continue to do public good. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hey, Diego, George Gascón just wrapping up a bombshell press conference where he announced that he intends to formally request the resentencing of Erik and Lyle Menendez tomorrow and file that paperwork. And they could, if a judge approves, be out within 30 to 45 days. Interestingly, the DA saying that he made this decision after heated debate in his office and only came to a decision about an hour ago.
Yes, and he did mention that he appreciated what they did while they were in prison, but he did not like the way they handled their abuse. So that was, we do want to let Rachel chime in here again before we let you go.
I think that he really was weighing all of the factors. There is no excuse for the murder. There's no excuse under the law for the murders that these brothers committed. But I believe as he was weighing new evidence and all of the factors we've discussed, including the years of abuse and how they handle the abuse and potential mitigation factors as it related to that, he reached the decision, which is controversial because of the brutal killings. Regardless of the reason, it's controversial under the law to reach this resentencing decision. But what he is doing is he is showing compassion for defendants, and that shows a different side of a prosecutor. So I think that he was well reasoned in his reasons for the resentencing decision, and I do think overall it's a more popular decision for him to have made.
And really quickly, Rachel, how quickly do you think this is going to go? Do you think there will be opposition? What is your sense of this? Do you think other DAs who originally prosecuted this case are going to come out, the ones that still believe that these brothers were not molested, that they should not be released?
I do. I believe that will happen at the resentencing hearing, because on the law, straight on the law, it's hard for them to justify any of the acts that they committed. But he has, he thoughtfully put forth how the sentencing would go and the reasons that he believes the immediate release is appropriate under the guidelines of the law. So I think that will be what the hearing looks like. It will look like the premeditation factors, that they had bought the guns, that they had planned this, that they weren't in immediate danger. And that's what the prosecutors who will contest any kind of resentencing will focus on, whereas the DA and the resentencing division that has requested this will focus on the softer factors.
All right, Rachel Fiset, criminal defense attorney, thank you so much for your time and your insight. And thank you as well, Ross Palumbo. I'm Amy Johnson. We will have more on this story at 4 right here on KCAL News and streaming on CBS News Los Angeles. We now return you to regular programming.